51 euros la acción. Ya hasta ahora, pendientes, el Parlamento británico está hablando, el primer ministro Keir Starmer respondiendo a la oposición. Vamos con él.
Protects its citizens and its children. As part of the public inquiry, Mr. Speaker, we will not let any institution deflect from their failures. Mr. Speaker, next Monday marks Holocaust Memorial Day. Visiting Auschwitz last week only strengthened my resolve to build a national Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre beside this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will also welcome the release of Emily Damari and other hostages from Gaza. We must now see the ceasefire deal implemented in full, the release of the remaining hostages and a surge in aid into Gaza for citizens. Mr. Speaker, may I also welcome Cheryl Corbell, whose young daughter Olivia was murdered in awful circumstances, and her sister Antonia to the chamber. I've met them twice, and we will change the law so that most serious offenders attend their sentencing hearings. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in the House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before Christmas, I received nearly 1,000 handwritten letters from pupils at St. Peter's Secondary School in Exeter. Each letter strongly advocated for greater support to tackle the mental health challenges faced by young people, with many sharing deeply unsettling personal stories. I'm committed to improving local mental health services to help young people build the resilience they need to live happy and healthy lives. However, Mr. Speaker, I know these challenges are not faced and not unique to my constituency and are being faced by children across our country. So can the Prime Minister please outline what steps his government are taking to enhance mental health support for our children nationwide?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising an issue of huge concern in his constituency and in all constituencies. Far too many young people are not receiving the care that they need. So we will provide access to specialist mental health professionals in every school, recruit an additional 8,500 staff to deal with children and adult mental health services, and roll out our Young Future hubs in every community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Marcus Campbell-Savers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will understand the importance of farming to the economy of my constituency in Penrith and Solway and Cumbria as a whole. With recent reports of foot-and-mouth outbreaks in Germany and concerns being expressed over transmission to the United Kingdom, would the Prime Minister assure this House that all government departments are on high alert and vigilant in monitoring the situation, particularly at places of entry, including airports where meat import controls can be lax? We must avoid the disaster that this would bring to UK farming.
Thank him for his question. We will do whatever it takes, Mr. Speaker, to protect farmers from the risk posed by foot and mouth. And that's why we acted swiftly to ban the imports of cattle, pigs and sheep and their products from Germany to protect farmers. We will not hesitate, Mr. Speaker, to restrict imports from additional countries if the disease spreads. We will keep the situation under close and careful review.
Leader of the Opposition, Kevin Bernard.
Mr. Speaker, can I take this opportunity to welcome the release of hostages, including Emily Damari, from barbaric captivity? I also know that the thoughts of many will be with the victims of the Southport killings. There are important questions to answer, and I will return to those after the case is concluded. Between 2009 and 2022, the OECD found children in England rose up global league tables in maths, reading and science. Conservative government action means English schools now top the Western world at maths and reading. The Prime Minister's Schools Bill, which is being voted on in committee this week, reverses the improvements that made this happen. This bill is an act of vandalism. It is wrecking a cross-party consensus that lasted for decades. Why does the Prime Minister think that so many school leaders are criticising this bill?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was Labour that introduced academies in the first place to drive up standards. Academies are here to stay and will continue to drive up standards. That's what the bill is about. But also in that bill are important provisions for protecting children, including a provision to stop abusers taking children out of school, a unique identifier to ensure the whereabouts of all children are known. What did the Leader of the Opposition do? She instructed all of them to vote against those measures.
He didn't even bother voting on that bill, Mr. Speaker. And he talks about safeguarding measures. That's not what the issue is. It's about the reforms that he is changing. We have an example of where these reforms were not introduced. Wales, which has been under Labour control for 2 decades. Welsh educational outcomes have tumbled down international league tables. Poor children in England now do better than wealthier children in Wales. This bill denies children the guarantee that their failing schools will be turned into a better academy. It is an attack on excellence. It is an attack on higher standards. It is an attack on aspiration. This bill is the worst of socialism, Mr. Speaker, and isn't it deprived children in England who will pay the price?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we introduced academies, we're committed to them, we're driving standards up. But this bill is important because it also sets up breakfast clubs for the very children that she claims to champion. It limits the expense of school uniform and it puts in place vital protections for children. She has to answer the question, why did she instruct all of them to vote against child protection measures?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister thinks that he can distract people from what is wrong with this bill. This is not about breakfast clubs and school uniforms. Teachers and parents will be horrified at just how bad this bill is. Even his own MPs may not realize it, but the bill will cut teachers' pay. It cuts pay for 20,000 teachers. His education secretary says there is not a ceiling for pay. They're all shaking their heads. They clearly haven't read the bill. She hasn't read the bill either. Because Clause 45 means teachers' pay will be capped. Did the Prime Minister know that the bill as it stands will cut teachers' pay?
Mr. Speaker, we do need flexibility in our schools. And if she'd hopped off social media for a while, she would have seen the amendment that was put down this morning to achieve that aim. But she says this bill is not about child protection. We had a young child killed who was taken out of a school by an abuser. This bill closes that gap. That is urgently needed. We have children who have not gone back to school since COVID. This bill closes that gap. She can make her points on academies. We can debate academies, but to vote against the bill is a disgrace on all of them.
This is nonsense, Mr. Speaker, and the amendment he's talking about does not address this issue. He raises academies. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like every other parent, I believe all our children should have the best teachers. Apart from cutting their pay, listen to what the head of Year 11, Mr. Speaker, at Michaela, the head of Year 11 at Michaela, the most successful school in the country, came from the armed forces. The headmistress says that with Labour's new rules, she would never have been able to hire him. Those are the academy freedoms I'm talking about. This bill would have blocked that veteran from teaching. The bill implies that doctors are not sufficiently qualified to teach biology, that Olympic medalists can't teach PE. Why is the Prime Minister closing down routes into teaching when we should be opening up more?
She knows that's not right. No, it's not. Look at the provisions in the bill, but to say there ought to be qualified teachers in our schools should not be extraordinary or opposed. And we had far too many examples in our secondary schools under their watch of teachers missing when we needed maths teachers. They championed maths. We didn't have enough maths teachers in our secondary schools, and I want every single child of the best possible education.
The fact facts speak for themselves. The standards went up under Conservative governments. What we need to know is who is benefiting. Mr. Speaker, everyone is asking who is benefiting from these changes. It's not teachers. Their pay is being capped. It's not parents. Their choices are being restricted. It's definitely not children. Their outcomes will get worse. So who is benefiting? It's the trade unions. The National Education Union sent out a tick list proving that after a decade and a half, they are finally getting their way. Why is the Education Secretary allowing trade unions to run her department and ruin children's education?
The bill benefits the children who need the nourishment of a breakfast club. The bill benefits the families that can't afford uniforms. The bill benefits the children who are currently out of school and nobody knows where they are. The bill benefits the children who could be taken out of school by abusers if this bill doesn't go through. She should change her mind and support these vital provisions.
The Prime Minister needs to get out more and speak to schools. I was at the Harris Academy just this month, and what are they saying? That this bill reverses 2 decades of progress. Imposing Labour's...
Pues 17 minutos pasan de la 1 de la tarde. En un momento vamos a volver a esa sesión en el Parlamento británico, pero antes la noticia de última hora nos hace mirar al mercado y en concreto a quien se ha convertido desde primerísima hora en el protagonista de la sesión en la bolsa española. ACS se encuentra disparada desde los primeros movimientos, más de un 4% es lo que sube ahora, lo que le catapulta por encima de los 51 euros por acción. Jornada en el que la acción del grupo que preside Florentino Pérez, ACS, marca récord superando ese nivel de los 51 euros por acción. Todo en una jornada en la que el mercado está upando al grupo al calor de ese plan de infraestructuras que promueve la administración Trump en Estados Unidos y por el lado técnico cuando los expertos han apuntado que se encontraba ya en subida libre tras superar la última resistencia que se situaba entre los 48,45 euros. Por parte del grupo ACS, este hito, ese precio máximo de la acción que estamos viendo intradía a esta hora por encima de los 51 euros por acción, marca récord, pero sobre todo exhibe la muestra del apoyo del mercado a la nueva estrategia del grupo centrada en los proyectos de nueva generación. Día histórico, día en el que ACS está viendo precisamente cómo su acción está alcanzando niveles récord y en una jornada en la que vemos precisamente cómo se sitúa ACS por encima de los 5. Pues 13:21 minutos de la mañana, a esta hora el protagonismo de la sesión. En un momento volvemos a esa jornada, sesión de preguntas en el Parlamento británico, pero a esta hora el protagonismo llega por las palabras que acaba de poner sobre la mesa, lo que está diciendo a esta hora el director ejecutivo de JP Morgan. Estamos escuchando, viendo a Jamie Dimon decir y defender que la seguridad nacional es más importante que un poco más de inflación. Mensaje claro que pone en un momento en el que la administración de Donald Trump está subrayando como clave proteger a los Estados Unidos como esa prioridad sobre la que respondía Donald Trump cuando firmaba sus primeras órdenes ejecutivas la noche del 20 de enero en su despacho Oval, y en un momento en el que está señalando, por otra parte, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, que los aranceles son un arma económica y pueden causar cierta inflación. Son las declaraciones que pone a esta hora sobre la mesa Jamie Dimon, director ejecutivo de JP Morgan, y subrayando precisamente ese mensaje de que la seguridad nacional es más importante que un poco de inflación. Seguiremos pendiente de lo que diga esta mañana, esta jornada de miércoles del 22 de enero, Jamie Dimon, que ya pone sobre la mesa esa defensa de la seguridad nacional. Y ahora nos volvemos a trasladar a Londres, sesión de preguntas para el primer ministro británico, Keir Starmer.
For a very long time. We are putting, Mr. Speaker, a record £25 billion investment into the NHS as part of our plan for change. Building an NHS fit for the future means places like Redditch will see lower waiting lists and services that reflect their needs. Whilst, Mr. Speaker, responsibility over service rests with the appropriate NHS Commissioner, I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss the issues.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the Prime Minister's opening remarks about the Southport killings and Holocaust Memorial Day? Can I particularly join him in expressing our immense relief at the release of Emily Damari and celebrate the fact she's back with her mum, Mandy, and the rest of her family? Let's hope we can get all the hostages released as soon as possible and the ceasefire turns into a lasting peace. Mr. Speaker, last week I urged the Prime Minister to speed up the Social Care Commission so we can get the changes people need implemented this year. The very next day it was announced that the chair of the Social Care Commission was also going to chair another important inquiry into grooming gangs. So the Prime Minister says that the job of chairing the Social Care Commission is so enormous that it's not possible to complete it within 3 years. Yet he also says that the chair of that commission, Baroness Casey, has got enough free time over the next few months to chair another inquiry. Very good point. Can the Prime Minister explain how both these things can be true?
Mr. Speaker, Baroness Casey is well placed to conduct the audit into grooming gangs, given her hard-hitting report on exploitation in Rotherham. It does not, he raises the issue, it does not affect her work on the Independent Commission on Adult Social Care, which begins in April. But as he knows, that report, the first part of that report will report next year, so we can deliver recommendations as we receive them. And he knows that already we're introducing fair pay agreements, providing more money for the social care funding and putting up the allowance. So we're already taking steps. There'll be a two-part report. We will act on the recommendations as they arrive, but this needs to be done properly.
Sir Ed David.
I still don't think the Prime Minister is making social care reform the priority that it needs. It's urgent. So we're going to keep coming back to this and holding to account. But, Mr. Speaker, turning now to the United States, can the Prime Minister guarantee that he will not sell out Britain's fantastic farmers to Donald Trump in a trade deal that undermines our high food and animal welfare standards in the way that the Conservatives sold them out in the Australia and New Zealand deals?
Mr. Speaker, we will work with the US, we will work with other countries, but we will never lower our standards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of my constituents across Southampton have had to put up with years of misery because of unsafe fire protection in their own homes, developers dragging their feet, and leaseholders having to foot the bill for mistakes they didn't make. Does the Prime Minister agree that enough is enough and it's time for developers to make all homes safe? And will he reassure leaseholders who bought their homes in good faith that this government has their back?
I thank him for raising this really important issue. Too many buildings are still unsafe and the speed of delivery has been far too slow. Our action plan sets out measures to identify buildings at risk and fix them faster. And my message, Mr. Speaker, is clear. The funding is there to fix this and there's no excuse not to deliver for residents.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Expanding London's airports and building a third runway at Heathrow would be incredibly irresponsible in the midst of a climate emergency, flying in the face of the Climate Change Committee's advice.
Pues llegamos a las 27 minutos que pasan de la 1 de la tarde y a esta hora seguimos muy pendientes de los grandes asuntos del día que ya desde el cierre de Wall Street está calentando motores. Wall Street está a punto de abrir sus puertas, queda menos, y en esta cuenta atrás ha comenzado a moverse esas operaciones previas al mercado. Un pre-market que tiene un nombre propio como claro protagonista y es Netflix. Se dispara un 14% en premercado la compañía, el gigante del streaming, después de que ayer, tal y como les vinimos contando, batiera previsiones en ingresos y batiera récord 300 millones de suscriptores tras haberse anotado en el trimestre también ese nuevo récord de suscripciones. Las acciones de Netflix se disparaban un 10% en After Hours después de superar y batir las expectativas en términos brutos y netos tras el cierre y en un momento en el que la compañía afirmaba que el crecimiento se ha visto impulsado por su oferta de contenido, un producto mejorado y la estacionalidad del cuarto trimestre. Ingresos netos del periodo de 1.870 millones de dólares, 4,27 dólares por acción y unos ingresos que en el cuarto trimestre se disparaban un 16%. Pero hasta ahora las ganancias de Procter & Gamble se convierten en otro de los protagonistas y que están registrando a esta hora un 2,5% de revalorización en premarket. La compañía supera estimaciones a medida que los consumidores se están haciendo con más productos básicos para el hogar. Creciente demanda de productos básicos señala la compañía en su informe, como el papel higiénico y los productos de lavandería a la hora de reportar sus informes de beneficios e ingresos trimestrales, ambos batiendo las previsiones del mercado con un BPA, un beneficio por acción de 1,88 dólares ajustados frente a los 1,86 dólares previstos, con unos ingresos de 21.880 millones por encima de los 21.540 que estaban previstos. Es un momento en el que, según la lectura de la compañía, las ventas netas han aumentado un 2%. Muchos protagonistas los que van a escribir esta jornada en la que seguimos muy pendientes del Foro Económico de Davos y a esta hora, por supuesto, pendientes del Parlamento británico. Continúan las preguntas para el primer ministro Keir Starmer. Le dejamos con ellos, terminamos aquí. Ponte en acción.
The verdict on the plan that he's talking about was this: major issues. This is their record. They shouldn't be chuckling. Major issues on the definition, the schedule, the budget, the quality and the delivery. It was a fiction, always was.
Joe Blatt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alongside Greater Manchester MPs, I recently met constituents who shared distressing accounts of malpractice by a spinal surgeon affecting many across the region. They have formed an injured staff and patient group, but despite a review, they feel justice hasn't been served and the hospital trust is yet to conduct a full patient recall. Will the Prime Minister arrange a meeting with the group and the relevant minister to help them get the justice that they deserve?
Well, I thank her for raising this awful case, and the stories and accounts that she puts forward are heartbreaking and deeply concerning. And I will make sure that she and the group receive a meeting with the relevant health minister at the earliest opportunity.
Mr. Benedict.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to his budget, which raised taxes, raised borrowing and raised public spending as a strategy for economic growth, when is the Prime Minister going to accept the words of the Labour Prime Minister in the 1970s, who explained to a Labour conference that in all candour that option no longer exists, and that the only way to obtain sustained economic growth will be by cutting taxes and cutting regulation?
Prime Minister. Well, he must have missed recent reports. The ONS has just said that we've got the highest investment for 19 years. The PwC have just said that this is the second best place to invest in the world. The IMF have just upgraded growth, now saying we're predicted to be the fastest growing major Europe.
En Directo en Negocios Televisión, el primer ministro británico Keir Starmer dando cuenta de los asuntos nacionales en la sede parlamentaria en Londres, y de Londres a Davos, donde en estos momentos está a punto de intervenir el ministro de Asuntos Exteriores de Irán, un discurso especial además de Mohammad Javad Zarif, también dando cuenta de algunos asuntos importantes en Oriente Medio, de los riesgos a los que se enfrenta la región, sobre todo tras la elección del presidente estadounidense, el flamante nuevo presidente en su segunda legislatura, Donald Trump, que añade algunos riesgos e incertidumbre extra en la región por cómo tratará de resolver los asuntos y negociar con todas las partes integrantes de este asunto.
was born between 85 and 87. So I wouldn't suggest anybody to start rejoicing over destroying Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Palestinian resistance, or to cutting Iran's arms, because the resistance will stay as long as the occupation stays, as long as repression stays. Resistance to Israel, to Israeli occupation, to apartheid, to genocide, existed before the Iranian Revolution. It came to being reinforced exactly at a time when Israel and Sharon believed that they had wiped out the resistance. I think right now, as you look at Gaza, Hamas is still there. Netanyahu did not achieve his goal of destroying Hamas. Hamas is still there. Israel had to come to a ceasefire, temporary. I hope it will be permanent, for the sake of 50,000 people who were massacred, genocide by Israel, so that there won't be another 50,000. But resistance is not dead. I can tell you that the wishes for the resistance to go away has been based on a misrepresentation, a framing by Israel, that this is not an Israeli-Palestinian issue, but an Israeli-Iranian issue. That's number one. Number two, go back to 1981-82 and move all the way to 2023, 2024. Give me a single instance when this resistance operated on Iranian behalf. They always worked for their own cause, even at our expense. They never carried our orders. We didn't know about October 7th. Actually, we were supposed to have a meeting with the Americans on JCPOA renewal on October 9th, which was undermined and destroyed by this operation.
But then it makes the case that this has been a very unwise investment for Iran to be funding all these militias, which are not even doing Iran's interests.
Well, let's not talk about funding, because a lot of people are funding a lot of things and they're not successful. But let's focus on the fact that we have supported people's rights. Now, Israeli actions are a matter of jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, in the case of genocide, a matter of criminal jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court in terms of Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense. So, and they cannot come to Davos. The president can come to Davos because he's a nobody in Israel, to reciprocate what he said yesterday. Otherwise, he would have had to go to The Hague instead of Davos. This is the reality on the ground. People will continue to resist. Now, why am I making this statement? Because if you want to resolve the problem of Palestine, you should not look at Iran. You should look at the Palestinian issue. As long as the Palestinian issue is there, the struggle will be there, the resistance will be there, and there will be support from the international community, including from Arab allies of the United States.
I take your point, but if I may, with respect, you haven't answered my question, which is about Iran's position. You've lost a key ally in Assad, you've lost, or at least you have a much weaker ally in Hezbollah. Your air defenses have been destroyed. We have reports or you tell me if it's not true, we have reports of generals in Iran talking about the fact that they've paid a very heavy price for the support of Assad. Is it not true that you are in a much weaker position?
But let me make, again, a couple of points. We fought Iraq when we didn't have any air defense, when we didn't have any weapons, when the United States was providing Iraq with AWACS, when the French were providing Iraq with Exocet missiles and Mirage fighters, when Germany was providing Iraq with chemical weapons, when Britain was providing Iraq with Chieftain tanks, when Russia, Soviet Union at that time, was providing Iraq with MiGs and Scud missiles, when China at that time was providing Iraq with Silkworm missiles. We didn't have anything. We stood against Iraq for 8 years, and we did not give up an inch of our territory. So, first of all, the story about destroying our air defense is a